I had not seen my parents in 4 years. The last time they saw me, my father called me a disgrace. My mother watched from behind glass, and my brother smiled while my clothes were thrown into a Chicago snowstorm. The next time they saw me, I was standing over that same brother with a scalpel in my hand. My name is Dr. Elena Pierce. At 34, I was Chief of Neurovascular Surgery at a respected Chicago hospital. My job was to enter the worst minutes of someone's life and make decisions steady enough to keep them alive. Families prayed for me before they knew my face. Residents learned to lower their voices when I was thinking. Nurses trusted my hands more than most people trusted promises. But to my family, I was still the failure. That was the story they chose. Elena Pierce, the med school dropout. Elena Pierce, the liar. Elena Pierce, the daughter who wasted money, embarrassed the family, and disappeared because she could not handle the truth. They never told people that my brother Nolan stole the trust fund my grandfather left for my education. They never mentioned the forged withdrawal letter, the fake dean's signature, or the email he deleted before I could prove I was still enrolled. They only remembered the version that protected him. Nolan Pierce was not raised like a son. He was raised like a crown prince. My father, Richard Pierce, believed the family name needed a male heir, though he was too polished to say it plainly. Nolan could be reckless, loud, and selfish, and my father would call it confidence. I could be disciplined, ambitious, and precise, and he would call it arrogant. My mother, Vivian, was cruel in softer ways. She wore pearls to breakfast and disappointment like perfume. If Nolan failed, she blamed pressure. If I succeeded, she said I was trying too hard. When he crashed my father's Mercedes at 17, drunk and laughing, Richard called it boys being boys. When I won a scholarship interview, Vivian told me not to embarrass myself by sounding desperate. When Nolan cheated on an exam, my parents blamed the teacher. When I came home with straight A's, my mother looked at the transcript and said, "Maybe if you smiled more, people would like you." I learned early that in our house, truth did not matter as much as usefulness. Nolan's lies were useful because they let my parents keep believing in him. My achievements were inconvenient because they proved I did not need the role they gave me. I was the serious daughter, the difficult daughter, the one who made everyone uncomfortable by remembering facts. The only person who seemed to understand me was my grandfather, Elias Monroe. He was not warm in the usual way, but he listened. When I was 15, he found me reading a biology textbook during a family party and sat across from me in the library. "You are not hiding," he said. "You are preparing." I never forgot that. Before he died, he created a trust fund for my medical education. $75,000. It was not enough to cover everything, but it was enough to keep me from drowning. Tuition gaps, books, fees, rent when loans were delayed. It was money meant to protect my dream from the kind of people who thought ambition was cute until it became inconvenient. The account was supposed to be safe. I was young, so my father was trustee. Everyone trusted Richard Pierce then. He wore tailored suits, served on boards, and spoke like a man too important to question. I trusted him too, because daughters are trained to believe fathers will protect what belongs to them. Nolan noticed the fund before I noticed the danger. By then, he had started building his fake founder personality. He had no real company, no real product, and no discipline. But he had learned the language of money. He said words like investors, disruption, and scalability. My parents ate it up. They wanted him to be brilliant so badly that they treated every empty phrase like a prophecy. But Nolan needed symbols. A luxury apartment, expensive clothes, a car that made people assume success before he had to prove it. So he took my future and painted it red. I found out my second year of medical school. The financial aid office emailed me about an unpaid balance that should not have existed. I remember standing outside the office with my phone in my hand, reading the message until the words blurred. Students passed me with coffee and notebooks, living normal lives, while I felt the floor drop beneath mine. I called my father first. He did not answer. I called again. Nothing. Then I called Nolan. He answered with music and laughter behind him. I asked if he knew anything about the trust account. There was a pause. Tiny. Almost nothing. But I heard it. "Elena," he said, amused. "You always panic before you understand anything." That was when I knew. A few days later, I saw the Porsche. It was red, polished, and obscene, rolling across campus like a confession no one else could read. Nolan drove it past me while I was coming off an overnight diner shift, still wearing shoes that smelled like fryer oil. It was freezing outside. I had slept less than an hour in the library and still had lab cleaning after class. That car was not just a car. It was my anatomy textbook, my rent, my tuition, my sleep, my health. It was every skipped meal turned into leather seats. It was my grandfather's faith in me converted into Nolan's image. I confronted him in the parking garage beneath his luxury apartment. He leaned against the Porsche and smiled like I had accused him of borrowing a jacket. "It was my education fund," I said. "It was family money," he replied. "No, it was grandfather's money, for me." His smile thinned when I said I was going to tell our parents. Nolan could survive a lot of things because Richard and Vivian wanted him innocent. But stealing from a trust was harder to polish. He knew that. For the first time, I saw panic behind his confidence, so he attacked first. 2 days later, my father ordered me home. "Not invited." "Ordered," his message said. "Be at the house by 7. We need to discuss your future." Snow had already started falling when I drove to Highland Park. The Pierce estate sat behind iron gates and bare winter trees glowing with warm light. From outside, it looked like safety. That is the cruel thing about beautiful houses. They can hide rot behind marble and chandeliers. Richard was waiting in the foyer. Vivian stood near the staircase, already crying with one hand pressed to her chest. Nolan stood above them, halfway up the stairs, silent and clean and smug. My father held a letter. I knew before he spoke that Nolan had done something worse than steal. Richard tossed the paper onto the table. It had my medical school's letterhead, a seal, and a forged dean's signature. According to the letter, I had withdrawn because of academic failure and disciplinary concerns. It said I had misrepresented financial information. It said the school would not support my reapplication without formal review. For a moment, I could not breathe. Not because the forgery was perfect. It was not. The spacing was wrong. The dean's title was outdated. Anyone who called the school would know. Anyone who wanted to know. "This is fake," I said. My father gave a cold laugh. "Of course it is." "No, Nolan made this." Vivian made a wounded sound. "Listen to yourself. Even now, blaming your brother." I turned to Nolan. "Tell them." He looked down at me from the staircase and said, "I don't know what she's talking about." I told them about the missing $75,000. I told them about the Porsche, the apartment, the timing. I begged them to call the school. I offered to open my student portal right there in the foyer. I said they could speak to the registrar, my advisor, anyone. My father refused to look at my phone. That was the moment I understood the truth. They did not believe Nolan because he was convincing. They believed him because his lie gave them permission to stop pretending they cared about me. "You have always been jealous of him," Richard said. "I am still enrolled," I whispered. "I have exams next week." "You are done," he said. "No, I am not. You are done taking my money. You are done humiliating this family. You are done standing in my house and lying to my face." Vivian dabbed her eyes. "You broke my heart, Elena." I looked at my mother, still hoping for something. A question, a doubt, a single crack in the performance. She gave me nothing. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking, "please, just call the school." Her face hardened. "Don't make this uglier than it already is." Richard walked to the hall closet. For one foolish second, I thought he was getting his coat to drive me back to campus and demand answers. Instead, he came back with black trash bags. My things were inside them, not folded, not packed with care, stuffed. Sweaters, jeans, shoes, notebooks, the old framed photo of my grandfather. My entire life reduced to plastic bags by the door. He had not called me home to discuss my future. He had called me home to watch him erase it. He opened the front door. Snow blew into the foyer. Then he threw the first bag onto the driveway. The second followed. Then the third. I remember the sound they made when they hit the snow. Wet, heavy, final. I remember Nolan's hand on the staircase railing. I remember the smell of pine from my mother's holiday arrangement. I remember snow melting on the marble floor near my shoes. "I am done investing in failure," Richard said. I stared at him. "Grandfather invested in me, not you." His face turned red. "You are no daughter of mine." The words sounded less like anger than paperwork, like he had closed an account. I looked at my mother one last time. She stood behind him in a cream sweater, diamonds at her ears, tears on her cheeks, and did nothing. No coat, no keys, no money, no call to the school, nothing. So I picked up my backpack and stepped outside. The cold hit immediately. It sliced through my clothes and made my fingers stiff as I grabbed the trash bags. Snow soaked through my shoes. Behind me, the door stayed open for a few seconds, spilling warmth over my back like a temptation. I turned once. Vivian was watching from behind the glass. That is what stayed with me most. Not my father's voice. Not Nolan's smile. Not even the cold, though it was brutal. It was my mother watching her daughter drag trash bags through the snow and choosing not to open the door. Halfway down the driveway, one bag split. Clothes spilled across the snow. My grandfather's photo landed face up, the cracked glass catching the driveway lights. I dropped to my knees to gather everything, and for a minute I could not see because I was crying too hard. Not loud crying, the silent kind, the kind that teaches you no one is coming. I slept that night in a 24-hour campus library. The next morning, I went to class. People always expect that part to sound heroic. It did not feel heroic. It felt mechanical. Nolan had taken my money. My parents had taken my home. The only thing left that still belonged to me was the future they were trying to bury. So I held onto it with both hands. I worked overnight shifts at a diner where my feet ached so badly I sometimes limped to morning lectures. I tutored undergraduates on weekends. I cleaned labs after midnight. I took paid research hours no one else wanted because they were tedious and lonely. I lived on gas station coffee, instant noodles, and whatever food was left after hospital seminars. I slept in library corners and borrowed coats from donation bins. I learned which bathrooms had locks strong enough to give me 5 minutes to cry before I had to become functional again. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered the driveway. Every time exhaustion made my hands shake, I remembered them shaking from cold. Every time Nolan posted a photo beside that red Porsche, wearing sunglasses and pretending to be a man who had built something, I opened another textbook. Rage is not pretty just because it keeps you alive. It is not noble because it helps you survive. But I will not lie and call my motivation pure. For years, part of me studied because I wanted to heal people. Another part studied because I wanted to become undeniable. I wanted to become so skilled, so disciplined, so impossible to dismiss that if my parents ever heard my name again, they would have to choke on it. And then I did. I graduated. I matched. I trained until calm became a reflex. Neurosurgery does not tolerate chaos. It demands precision, stamina, and the ability to make decisions while everyone else is praying. Maybe that was why I was good at it. Chaos had raised me. Panic had educated me. Betrayal had taught me how to keep my face still while my world burned. By 34, I had become one of the youngest chiefs of neurovascular surgery in Chicago. My parents did not know. Or if they did, they never admitted it. They kept telling their version, and I let them. I had built a life without them. A husband who loved me without making me audition for it. Colleagues who respected me. Patients who needed me. A name I had reclaimed one operation at a time. I used to imagine seeing my family again. Sometimes in weak moments, I imagined them apologizing. Sometimes in darker moments, I imagined them needing me. But I never imagined it would happen the way it did. On a Tuesday evening in October, I had just finished a 14-hour cranial bypass. My shoulders ached. My feet felt numb. I was reviewing post-op notes when Trauma Room 1 erupted behind me. A man had collapsed at a private investor event, severe headache, vomiting, seizure, blood pressure dangerously high, one pupil dilated, possible ruptured aneurysm. I moved before emotion could catch me. I entered the room giving orders. Then I saw his face. Nolan Pierce lay on the stretcher, pale and barely conscious, his perfect hair damp with sweat, his body jerking beneath the hands of strangers, trying to keep him alive. For 1 second, I was not Dr. Elena Pierce. I was the girl in the snow again. Then the doors burst open behind me, and my mother's voice cut through the trauma room. When Vivian saw my badge, she did not ask if her son would live. She screamed for security. The trauma room went silent in the strange way a room can go silent without actually becoming quiet. Monitors were still screaming. Nurses were still moving. A resident was calling out Nolan's blood pressure. Someone was cutting through his shirt. Someone else was trying to secure an IV line in a vein that kept collapsing under stress. But beneath all of that, there was a sudden human pause. My mother had recognized me. Vivian Pierce stood just inside the trauma bay doors in a camel coat and heels too expensive for hospital floors. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless except for the panic cracking through it, and behind her came Richard with his phone pressed to his ear, barking at someone who was not answering fast enough. Then Vivian saw my face. For 1 second, I watched confusion move across her expression, then disbelief, then something uglier. "You," she said. I did not answer. Nolan was seizing, his oxygen saturation was falling, his right pupil was blown, his blood pressure was so high it looked like a warning, not a number. 2 milligrams lorazepam, I said. Prepare for intubation. Page anesthesia. Get CT ready, but if he keeps declining, we move straight to OR. Vivian stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" Nurse Marisol Vega, our charge nurse that night, glanced at me, then at my mother. Marisol had been in more emergency rooms than most people had been in parking lots. She had seen grief, denial, violence, shock, and families who mistook volume for love. But even she looked unsettled by the way my mother stared at me. I said, "What are you doing here?" Vivian repeated, louder. I leaned over Nolan, checking his response. "Nolan, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. His mouth pulled to one side. He tried to speak, but what came out was wet and broken. "Possible ruptured anterior communicating artery aneurysm," I said. "He is actively deteriorating." My mother grabbed my sleeve. That was when Marisol moved. She stepped between us with the calm authority of a woman who had removed drunk fathers, hysterical wives, and armed cousins from treatment areas without raising her voice. "Ma'am, step back." Vivian looked at her as if she had been slapped. "Do you know who I am?" "No," Marisol said. "And right now, I don't need to." Vivian pointed at me. She is not a doctor. She is my daughter. She dropped out of medical school. I don't know what scam she is running, but I want security here now." The room shifted again. A junior nurse looked down at my badge as if confirming reality. A resident froze for half a second before remembering Nolan was dying. Marisol's face hardened. I did not explain myself. I did not defend my degree. I did not tell my mother about the years I spent sleeping in libraries, the fellowships, the surgeries, the bodies I had pulled back from the edge of death. I simply turned my badge toward her. Dr. Elena Pierce, Chief of Neurovascular Surgery. Vivian stared at it. The color drained from her face. Richard had finally ended his call. What the hell is going on? My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I looked at both of them and said, "I am the only surgeon in this building who can keep your son from dying tonight." For the first time in my life, neither of my parents had an immediate answer. Then Nolan's monitor screamed. His heart rate spiked, his body stiffened. The left side of his face sagged further, and his breathing became irregular, shallow, wrong. "He's herniating," I said. "Intubate now. Mannitol, hypertonic saline. Get him upstairs." Richard stepped into my path. "No, absolutely not." I looked at him as if he were another obstruction in the room. "Move. You are not touching my son. Your son has minutes before the pressure inside his skull causes permanent brain damage." I want another surgeon. There is no other surgeon with my specialty available fast enough. I'll fly someone in. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely him. Richard Pierce still believed money could bully time. "You cannot fly in a surgeon faster than a brain can die," I said. His jaw clenched. "I will pay whatever it costs." He reached into his coat and pulled out a black credit card. He turned to the admissions clerk who had been pulled into the chaos to confirm emergency consent and payment responsibility. "Run this," he snapped. "Get whoever she reports to. Get the hospital director. I want her removed." The clerk hesitated, then took the card because people often follow wealth before they follow logic. She swiped it at the side terminal, declined. Richard glared. "Run it again." She did. Declined. The silence after that little electronic beep was sharper than shouting. Richard's face flushed dark red. "Your system is down." The clerk swallowed. "Sir, it says the account is frozen." "Impossible." I watched his expression with a strange emptiness. Years ago, that man had thrown my clothes into the snow and told me he was done investing in failure. Now he stood in my hospital, holding a useless card while his chosen son's brain bled in front of him. I did not gloat. I did not need to. "Money cannot operate on a ruptured brain aneurysm, Richard," I said. "I can." Vivian made a sound between a sob and a gasp. No, she can't. She hates him." I turned back to Nolan. His pressure was dropping now in the wrong rhythm. His body was telling us what words could not. "Or now," I said. The team began moving. Vivian ran in front of the stretcher. I still remember that image, my mother, elegant and trembling, standing between a dying son and the daughter she had thrown away. Her hands were raised as if she could physically hold back consequence. "You are not taking him," she said. Marisol's voice turned cold. "Ma'am, step aside." Vivian ignored her. Her eyes locked on me. "You have waited years for this. Don't pretend you haven't. You were always jealous, always angry, and now you want revenge." The room was full of witnesses, nurses, residents, anesthesiology, a respiratory therapist with a tube ready in his hand. Security had finally arrived, confused and slow, waiting for someone important to tell them who the threat was. For a moment, I saw the foyer again. The forged letter, Nolan's smile, my mother behind the glass, the snow swallowing my clothes. Then I looked at the monitor. Nolan did not have time for my pain. You want truth? I said quietly. Fine. Nolan stole the trust fund grandfather left for my medical education. He bought a Porsche with it. When I threatened to expose him, he forged a dropout letter and made you believe I had failed. I begged you to call the school. You refused. You threw me out in a blizzard. Vivian's lips parted. Richard's face tightened. I stepped closer. And now he has a ruptured aneurysm. If we do not relieve pressure and clip the bleed, he will die or become brain dead. So you can step aside and let me save the son you chose, or you can stand there and watch him die. Choose quickly. Vivian stared at me like I had struck her. Then Nolan's body jerked again. That finally broke her. She stumbled backward, and the stretcher flew past her toward the elevators. I walked beside it, one hand on the rail, already giving orders. In the elevator, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic, sweat, and emergency drugs, I looked down at my brother. His face was slack now beneath the oxygen mask. The arrogance was gone. The golden child, the liar, the thief, the man who had built his life out of stolen faith and borrowed money, was reduced to a body fighting pressure, blood, and time. For one dangerous second, I wondered if this was justice. Then I hated myself for wondering. The elevator doors opened. We moved fast. Operating rooms have their own kind of holiness. Not gentle holiness, not candles and hymns, a harsher kind. Bright lights, steel instruments, blue drapes, gloved hands, no space for lies, no room for family mythology. In an OR, the body tells the truth whether the patient wants it to or not. Before scrubbing, I stepped to the sink. Hot water ran over my hands, and suddenly I remembered my hands 4 years earlier, red and numb from gathering clothes out of snow. I remembered trying to hold torn plastic bags with fingers so cold they would not close properly. I remembered sleeping in the library with my hands tucked under my arms because I could not stop shivering. Now, those same hands were the only thing between Nolan and death. I pressed the scrub brush against my skin harder than necessary. Would he have saved me? No. If I had collapsed in front of him, Nolan would have stepped over me if there was a camera waiting on the other side. Did he deserve my skill? That was the wrong question. Medicine does not ask whether a person deserves to live before you stop the bleeding. If it did, hospitals would become courtrooms, and surgeons would become executioners with cleaner hands. Saving him was not forgiveness. It was proof I was not him. My oath required me to save his life. It did not require me to save his lies. By the time I entered the OR, my mind had narrowed to the procedure. The anesthesiologist confirmed airway control. The CT angiography had shown what I suspected: ruptured aneurysm, catastrophic hemorrhage, rising intracranial pressure. The bleed was unstable. We had very little room for error. Let's begin, I said. The first incision always quiets the world for me, not emotionally, technically. Skin, soft tissue, bone, exposure, pressure, bleeding, anatomy. Every layer matters, every second matters. Nolan's brain was swollen and angry beneath the skull. Blood had spread where it did not belong, irritating tissue, compressing life into smaller and smaller spaces. One wrong movement could rupture the aneurysm further. One careless clip could cut off blood flow and leave him worse than dead. My resident, Dr. Patel, stood across from me, pale but steady. You know who he is? He asked softly, just once. Yes, I said. He did not ask anything else. That was why I respected him. We opened carefully. The aneurysm was fragile, a small, furious weakness in a vessel that had chosen the worst possible moment to break. Blood obscured the field. Suction, irrigation, patience. The room existed in fragments of language. Clip, suction, hold there, pressure rising, temporary clip ready. Time changed shape. It always does during surgery. Minutes become movements, the body becomes a map, and the surgeon becomes both traveler and restraint. I forgot Richard's voice. I forgot Vivian's accusation. I forgot Nolan's Porsche and the forged letter and the staircase. Not because I forgave them, but because if I carried them into the field, my hands would not be clean enough for the work. There was a moment when the aneurysm threatened to blow. A thin pulse of blood appeared where I did not want it. Dr. Patel stiffened. The scrub nurse held her breath. The anesthesiologist called out a pressure change. "Steady," I said. I do not know if I was speaking to the team or myself. I adjusted the angle, placed the clip, and waited. 1 second, 2, 3. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. The room exhaled. We confirmed flow where it needed to remain. No compromise to the parent vessel, no active bleed. The brain was still swollen. Damage had already been done by the hemorrhage before he reached us. He could wake with weakness, speech issues, paralysis, cognitive changes, or he might not wake fully at all. That part belonged to time, but the aneurysm was secured. Nolan was alive. Hours later, when the final closure was done and the dressings were in place, I stepped back from the table. My shoulders felt carved from stone. Sweat had dried under my cap. My hands ached from precision. "He made it," Dr. Patel said quietly. I nodded. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel mercy. I felt empty and awake. Outside the OR, I removed my gloves, washed my hands again, and looked at myself in the reflection above the sink. There were faint marks on my face from the surgical mask. My eyes looked older than they had that morning. For years, I had imagined what revenge would feel like. Hot, maybe. Satisfying. A dramatic explosion where everyone finally saw what they had done. Instead, I had saved my brother's life and felt the weight of every boundary I would still have to build. Marcel was waiting near the surgical doors when I came out. She had changed gloves, tied her hair tighter, and looked at me with the kind of concern nurses rarely waste on people they do not respect. "You okay, Chief?" she asked. I almost said yes. Instead, I said, "Not really." She nodded once. "But the surgery?" "Successful, for now." "And the family?" I looked toward the waiting room. Richard and Vivian were there, standing beneath fluorescent lights that made them look less wealthy than usual. Without the estate, the staircase, the chandeliers, they seemed smaller. My father's phone was in his hand. My mother clutched a tissue that had been shredded between her fingers. They both stood when they saw me. For a second, I saw hope on their faces. That hurt more than I expected, because some small, foolish part of me still wanted that hope to be for me. I wanted them to look at me and see the daughter they had misjudged, the child they abandoned, the woman who had just saved their son despite everything. But their eyes moved past me first, toward the doors, toward Nolan, always toward Nolan. I stopped in front of them. "He survived the surgery," I said. Vivian covered her mouth and sobbed. Richard closed his eyes, and for a moment his face almost broke. Almost. "The aneurysm was clipped," I continued. "The bleeding is controlled. He is going to ICU. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical. There may be neurological deficits from the hemorrhage." Vivian dropped her hand. "What does that mean?" "It means he may have weakness, paralysis, speech difficulty, memory changes, or other complications." We will know more when he wakes. Richard's relief twisted into anger because anger was easier for him than fear. So you are saying he is damaged? I am saying he had a catastrophic brain hemorrhage. But you fixed it. I stopped the bleeding. I did not erase the injury that happened before he arrived. Vivian stared at me, tears shining. But he is alive? Yes, I said. He is alive. She sank into the chair behind her as if her bones had dissolved. Richard stood rigid. His mouth moved once, like a thank you was trying to climb out and dying before it reached air. He never said it. I had known he would not. Still, something inside me noticed. A hospital administrator approached quietly with a folder. Billing, consent, emergency responsibility forms, practical things, unromantic things. The kind of things wealthy families assume will be handled by invisible people until the invisible people require signatures. I took the folder and handed it to Richard. He frowned. What is this? Emergency surgical deposit and financial responsibility notice. Vivian looked offended through her tears. This is hardly the time. It is exactly the time, I said. Nolan's insurance is inactive. Richard blinked. No, it isn't. It lapsed months ago. That is impossible. He runs a medical technology company. I looked at him. Then you may want to ask why his premiums were not paid. The administrator spoke carefully. Because Mr. Pierce was admitted under emergency conditions, treatment was not delayed. But the initial estimated deposit is $185,000. Vivian laughed once, not because she found it funny, because denial sometimes wears the face of amusement. $185,000, she said. That is nothing. Nolan is worth millions. Richard straightened, recovering some of his old arrogance. I will make calls. I looked at his frozen card still clenched in his hand. They were still worshiping a statue that had already cracked down the middle, I thought. But I said nothing, because I had already given them the first truth of the night. Their son was alive. The second truth was coming, and it would bleed far beyond the operating room. For a few minutes after I told my parents Nolan had survived, the waiting room felt almost peaceful. Not peaceful in a healing way. Peaceful the way a battlefield feels after the smoke lifts and everyone realizes they are still standing. Vivian sat with both hands pressed to her mouth, crying into her palms. Richard stood beside the window, staring at nothing. His phone clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Neither of them looked at me for long. Their relief belonged to Nolan. Their fear belonged to Nolan. Even their anger still belonged to Nolan. I had just opened his skull, clipped the aneurysm, stopped the bleeding, and kept their golden son alive. And still, I could feel them trying to decide how much credit they were willing to let me have. He is in ICU now, I said. He is sedated. We are controlling swelling and blood pressure. The next day matters. Vivian looked up at me. Her mascara had begun to gather under her eyes in soft gray shadows. Will he wake up normal? There it was. Not will he wake up, not will he live. Normal, because to Vivian, suffering was acceptable only if it did not damage the image. I cannot promise that, I said. The hemorrhage affected areas near the motor pathways. There may be weakness on his left side, possibly speech changes, possibly cognitive issues. We have to wait. Richard turned sharply. But you said the surgery worked. It did. Then why are you already listing excuses? I looked at him for a second too long. 4 years had passed, and he still used the same tone, the one that made everything sound like a performance review. Because surgery is not magic, I said. I repaired the ruptured vessel. I did not reverse every second of bleeding before he reached the hospital. Vivian's face twisted. But you were the surgeon. Yes. So, if something is wrong with him now, Vivian, I said quietly, finish that sentence carefully. She stopped. Maybe it was the exhaustion in my voice. Maybe it was the fact that Marisol had stepped closer behind me. Maybe, for the first time, my mother understood I was no longer trapped in her house, under her roof, beneath her version of events. Richard looked at the folder in his hand again, as if the billing notice had personally insulted him. This hospital will not be a problem. The hospital is not the problem, I said. He ignored me and pulled out his phone. I will call Nolan's CFO. Vivian wiped at her cheeks. Yes, Nolan has people for this. He has a company. He has investors. I watched them cling to that word. Investors. It was almost religious to them. Proof that Nolan had become what they always said he would become. Proof that the son they chose was not just successful, but brilliant, important, untouchable. I knew better. I had known for months. The first time Nolan's company crossed my life again, it was not through my parents. It was through a glossy investor packet forwarded to me by a colleague with a laughing message. Is this your brother? The company was called Neurovanta Health. According to its website, it had built an artificial intelligence platform capable of detecting early neurological risk through voice patterns, micro-expression analysis, and wearable data. According to Nolan's interviews, the technology was revolutionary. According to the investor deck, I was one of its medical advisors. That was how I found out my name had been stolen again. There was a page with my old student photograph taken before everything collapsed. Beneath it were words I had never approved. Dr. Elena Pierce, medical advisory consultant. There was even a signature on a compliance statement. My signature, or something pretending to be mine. I remember staring at that page in my hospital office, feeling a coldness that had nothing to do with weather. Nolan had stolen my education fund. He had stolen my credibility. Now he was trying to borrow my medical license to decorate his fraud. That was when I told Marcus. Marcus Hale was my husband, though my parents did not know that yet. We met years after I left the Pierce house, after I had learned how dangerous it was to mistake intensity for love. Marcus was calm in a way that did not feel empty. He listened without trying to own the room. He was a senior corporate fraud attorney, the kind of man who could read a contract and hear the lie breathing underneath it. When I showed him the investor packet, he did not explode. He did not promise revenge like a man in a movie. He took the pages, read every line, and said, "This is not just offensive. This is evidence." I had not wanted to become part of Nolan's orbit again. I told myself I was above it. I told myself my life was too full to waste energy proving what kind of man he was. But when someone forges your name onto medical compliance documents, peace becomes negligence. So, Marcus began looking quietly. He found shell companies, circular payments, fake board members, demo videos edited to look live, investor reports that contradicted bank records, new money used to pay old obligations, health tech language wrapped around a structure that looked less like innovation and more like a Ponzi scheme wearing a white coat. And then Nolan arrived in my trauma room with blood exploding inside his skull. That was not planned. What happened next was, while my parents stood in the hospital waiting room pretending the bill was a minor inconvenience, the elevator doors opened behind them. Marcus stepped out in a charcoal suit carrying a leather folder. Two federal agents walked several paces behind him. I saw Richard notice the suit first. Men like my father respected tailoring before they respected truth. Then he noticed the agents. His expression tightened. Vivian looked Marcus up and down with suspicion. "Who are you?" Marcus stopped beside me. Not in front of me, beside me. I loved him for that. "Marcus Hale," he said, "Elena's husband." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. My mother blinked. "Her what?" "My husband," I said. Richard stared at my left hand as if my wedding ring had appeared there just to spite him. I had worn it through the entire conversation. He simply had not looked closely enough to notice anything about me that was not useful to his anger. "You're married?" Vivian whispered. "Yes." "To him?" Richard asked, as if Marcus were some kind of clerical error. Marcus gave him a mild look. "That is generally what husband means." Even exhausted, I almost smiled. Vivian's gaze darted toward the agents. "Why are they here?" Before Marcus could answer, one of the agents stepped forward and showed identification. "Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, we are here in connection with an active federal investigation involving Neurovanta Health and Nolan Pierce." Vivian gripped the arm of her chair. "No." Richard straightened. "This is inappropriate. My son is in critical condition." "Yes," Marcus said. "And because he is alive, certain procedures can continue once he is medically stable." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What procedures?" Marcus opened the folder. "Neurovanta Health is under investigation for securities fraud, wire fraud, healthcare technology misrepresentation, identity misuse, and investor deception." Vivian shook her head quickly. "No. Nolan runs an AI company. He helps people. His platform diagnoses brain disease." I looked at her. "There is no platform." She turned toward me, offended by the sound of my voice. "You do not know that." "I do," I said, "because he used my name to sell it." Marcus removed a copy of the investor deck and placed it on the small table between them. My old photograph stared up from the page like a ghost. Richard looked down. Vivian leaned closer, her mouth opened, then closed. "That is not current," she said weakly. "No," I said. "It was taken when I was still a student. Before Nolan convinced you, I had dropped out." Richard picked up the page. "Medical advisory consultant." "I never worked for him?" Marcus added. "The signature on the attached compliance statement is forged. The credentials were used to reassure investors that the product had medical oversight. It did not." Vivian whispered, "Nolan would not do that." The strange thing was, I believed that she believed herself. Vivian had spent so many years protecting Nolan from consequence that her mind rejected evidence the way skin rejects a splinter. He could admit the truth in front of her, and she would still look for a way to call it pressure. Richard read the page again. "This proves nothing." "No," Marcus said calmly. "By itself, it proves identity misuse. The bank records prove more." One of the agents spoke. "Federal subpoenas were served earlier today. Mr. Pierce was notified before his collapse." Something shifted in the room. I looked at the agent. "Today?" "Yes, doctor. Approximately 2 hours before EMS was called." Vivian pressed a shaking hand to her chest. "Are you saying the government caused this?" "No," I said. "I am saying Nolan's blood pressure was dangerously high. Extreme stress can trigger a hypertensive crisis. If he already had a weakened aneurysm, that spike could have contributed to rupture." Richard seized on the word "could." "So you do not know?" "I know his guilt did not metaphorically catch up with him," I said. "It physically exploded inside his skull." Vivian flinched as if the sentence had slapped her. Marcus slid another document across the table. "Neurovanta's financial structure is collapsing. Investor funds were moved through multiple entities. Large portions are unaccounted for. Several accounts linked to the company have been frozen." Richard's face hardened. "Linked how?" Marcus looked at him directly. "You are listed as a guarantor on multiple instruments. I am not. You are. I never signed anything for that company. Marcus opened another page and turned it toward him. Richard snatched it up. His eyes moved over the signature line, then stopped. Vivian leaned in. Richard? His voice dropped. Nolan said it was a family tax document. Marcus did not soften. You signed a guarantee tied to company debt. I did not read it. No, Marcus said. You did not. For the first time that night, my father looked old. Not weak, not sorry, just old. Like his arrogance had been holding his face together and one seam had finally split. Marcus continued, because of that signature, assets connected to you are under review. Brokerage accounts, certain business holdings, liquidity accounts, potentially the Highland Park estate depending on lien priority and loan structure. Vivian stood too quickly. The house? No, that is impossible. Not impossible, Marcus said. Documented. Richard's voice rose. My son would not tie my house to company debt. I almost laughed. Your son stole from his sister to buy a car. Why is your house where you suddenly find the line? His eyes flashed toward me. You do not get to speak to me that way. I stepped closer and, for once, he stepped back. I opened Nolan's skull tonight, I said. You are standing in my hospital holding evidence of his fraud with your accounts frozen and your card declined. I will speak exactly as clearly as necessary. Vivian stared at me like she did not recognize me. Good. I had spent years becoming unrecognizable to the people who only knew how to hurt the old version of me. The administrator returned quietly, asking if Richard would be signing the emergency responsibility forms. He looked at the papers as if they were written in another language. $185,000, he muttered. That is the initial deposit, the administrator said carefully. Additional costs depend on ICU stay, imaging, medications, specialist care, and rehabilitation. Vivian gave a small laugh that broke halfway through. But Nolan has money. Marcus closed the folder. The inheritance is gone. The words seemed too simple for the damage they did. Richard turned slowly. What inheritance? I answered before Marcus could. The $8 million you transferred to him after you disowned me. Vivian's eyes filled again. That was family planning. That was punishment, I said. You gave Nolan everything because you wanted my absence to look like proof of his worth. Richard's face tightened. That money was invested. In image, Marcus said. Private flights, luxury apartments, event spaces, cars, consultants, paid press, fake demonstrations, returns to early investors. There is no evidence of a functioning product generating revenue. Vivian shook her head so hard her earrings trembled. No, Nolan went to Stanford. He knows technology. He attended one semester, I said, then left. He graduated. No, Vivian, he did not. Her face twisted in anger. You are lying. I wish I were. That was true, and that was what made it bitter. Some part of me still wished Nolan had been brilliant in the way they claimed, not because I wanted him successful, but because then maybe my destruction would have meant something to them. Maybe they had traded me for gold. Instead, they had traded me for glitter. Richard lowered himself into a chair. For years, he had measured people by money, reputation, control, the family name. Now, all of those things were being dragged into fluorescent light, and he looked genuinely confused that the universe had not exempted him. Marcus looked at him. You spent your life calling Elena careless. Your son destroyed you with a document you did not bother to read. Richard's jaw clenched. Do not lecture me about my family. Marcus's expression did not change. You are not being lectured. You are being informed. One of the federal agents asked Richard if he would be willing to answer preliminary questions. Richard refused immediately and demanded counsel. That, at least, was intelligent. Vivian looked between all of us as though someone should step in and reverse the scene. But there was no father to call, no board chair to pressure, no family friend to bury the story. The Pierce name had entered a system it could not charm. I should have felt satisfaction. I did. A little. But it came mixed with grief so old I almost did not recognize it. Because watching my parents lose everything did not restore what they had taken from me. It did not give me back the nights in the library, the hunger, the humiliation, the years I spent wondering if I was secretly as worthless as they said. Consequence is not the same as repair. It just prevents the wound from pretending it was never made. Vivian suddenly turned on me. How long have you known? I met her eyes. That Nolan used my name? Months. And you did not tell us? No. How could you keep this from your family? That word, family. It always arrived like a bill someone else expected me to pay. You threw me out in a snowstorm, I said. You do not get emergency access to my loyalty. Her lips trembled. We thought you had lied. You wanted to think that. No, she whispered. Yes, I said. Because if I was a liar, then you were not cruel. If I was a failure, then Nolan was not a thief. If I was jealous, then you did not have to admit you sacrificed your daughter to protect your son. Richard stood abruptly. Enough. No, I said. Not enough. Not anymore. The agents exchanged a glance but said nothing. Marcus remained beside me, steady as stone. Vivian lowered herself back into the chair. For a moment, she looked less like my mother and more like a woman discovering she had decorated her entire life around a rotten beam. Then she whispered, "He is still my son." I nodded. I know. That was never the problem. The problem was that I had been her daughter too. Before anyone could speak again, Marisol appeared at the entrance to the waiting area. Her face was pale, and the controlled urgency in her eyes made every medical instinct in me sharpen. "Dr. Pierce," she said. I turned immediately. "What happened?" "It's Nolan. He is waking earlier than expected." Vivian rose with a gasp. "He's awake?" Marisol did not look at her. She looked at me. "He is agitated," she said, "trying to pull lines. Speech is slurred, left side is weak, blood pressure climbing." I was already moving. Richard followed. Vivian hurried after him. Marcus came too, but slower, watching everything, understanding that the medical crisis had not ended just because the legal one had begun. As we reached the ICU corridor, I heard Nolan before I saw him. His voice was rough, broken, and furious. "Where is my phone?" A nurse tried to calm him. Another held his right arm away from the central line. His left arm lay still against the blanket. One side of his face drooped. His eyes darted wildly until they found me in the doorway. For half a second, something like recognition flickered through him. Then hate. "You," he slurred. Vivian rushed toward the bed. "Nolan, baby." He ignored her. His one working hand clawed against the restraint as he glared at me. "What did you do to me?" The room froze. I stood at the foot of his bed, still in my surgical cap, still carrying the exhaustion of saving his life. Nolan's mouth twisted. "You finally got your revenge," he said, voice thick and vicious. "You paralyzed me." Behind me, I heard Vivian gasp. Richard's breathing changed. And just like that, the old family pattern tried to come back from the dead. Nolan looked smaller in the ICU bed than he had ever looked in my memory. That should have made me feel something soft. It did not. His head was wrapped in clean white dressing. Tubes ran from his arms. Monitors blinked around him with steady mechanical patience, recording every beat his body had not earned from kindness, but had received from medicine anyway. The left side of his face sagged slightly. His mouth pulled unevenly when he tried to speak. His left arm lay still against the blanket, useless for the moment, while his right hand fought against the restraint with weak, furious jerks. He had survived. And the first thing he did with that survival was accuse me. "You paralyzed me," he slurred. Vivian gasped as if he had revealed the truth of the century. Richard stepped closer to the bed, his old anger snapping back into place because anger was easier than fear, easier than shame, easier than admitting that the son he worshipped had woken up exactly as cruel as he had gone under. I looked at Nolan's monitor. His blood pressure was climbing again. "Nolan," I said evenly, "you had a ruptured brain aneurysm, blood irritated and damaged tissue near motor pathways before you arrived. The surgery stopped the bleeding. It did not cause the initial injury." His right hand clawed at the blanket. "Liar." A nurse adjusted one of his lines. "Mr. Pierce, you need to stay calm." "Get my phone," he snapped, the words thick and wet. "Get my lawyer. Get her out." Vivian leaned over him, stroking his hair with trembling fingers. "Baby, don't strain yourself." He jerked away from her touch. "Phone." "Nolan," Richard said, voice low. "Listen to the doctors." That made Nolan laugh, or try to. The sound came out crooked. "Doctors? She is not my doctor. She is the psycho who waited years to cut into my brain." The room went still. Marisol stood near the doorway with her arms crossed, eyes cold. Marcus was behind me, quiet, watching Nolan with the expression he used when someone was too arrogant to realize they were making a legal record out of their own mouth. Two nurses remained by the bed. Dr. Patel hovered near the monitor, trying to decide whether to medicate Nolan now or let me attempt one more verbal intervention. I took one step closer. "You are breathing because of my hands," I said. "Choose your next lie carefully." His eyes burned at me. One pupil still looked slightly wrong, but the hatred in him was perfectly intact. "You loved this," he said. "Admit it. You loved seeing me helpless." "I loved nothing about tonight." "You expect me to believe that?" "I do not care what you believe." Vivian lifted her head sharply. "How can you talk to him that way?" I turned to her. "He is raising his blood pressure after major brain surgery. If he keeps doing that, he can bleed again, stroke again, or die. So yes, I am going to speak clearly." Richard's voice cut in. "And we are supposed to trust that? You expect us to believe his paralysis has nothing to do with you?" There it was. The old shape of the family returned like a stain through paint. Nolan lied. My parents reacted. I became the explanation for whatever hurt them most. It did not matter that I had saved him. It did not matter that they had watched an entire medical team move under my command. It did not matter that the imaging, the timing, the surgical report, and every person in that room could confirm what happened. Nolan had accused me, so they were ready to believe. For 1 second, I felt the old exhaustion rise in me. Not sadness exactly. Recognition. The kind of pain that does not surprise you anymore, but still knows where to press. Then something inside me went calm, not numb, finished. "Do you want the medical explanation?" I asked. "Or the family fantasy?" Vivian recoiled. "Elena." "No," I said. We are not doing this again. Richard's face hardened. Doing what? Letting Nolan set the room on fire and then blaming me for the smoke. Nolan's mouth twisted. Still dramatic. Still alive, I said. You are welcome. His eyes narrowed. Vivian grabbed the bed rail. You have always hated him. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. She was trembling, yes, but not with guilt. With fear. Fear that Nolan might not be perfect anymore. Fear that the son she built her identity around might need help, might be exposed, might become difficult to display. And instead of facing that, she was reaching for the oldest comfort she had. Blame Elena. That was the moment I understood something I had avoided for years. I said, more to myself than anyone else, you did not believe Nolan because he was convincing. You believed him because his lies gave you permission to keep hating me. Vivian's eyes filled. How dare you? How dare I? I repeated softly. My voice did not rise. That made it worse for them. How dare I stand here after saving his life and refuse to be accused of maiming him? How dare I tell the truth after 4 years of swallowing your version? How dare I stop being useful to people who only call me family when they need something? Richard pointed toward the door. Marcus, get your wife under control. Marcus's expression did not change. No. Richard blinked. He was not used to men refusing him in one syllable. Marcus continued, and I would be careful about making malpractice accusations in front of medical staff and federal witnesses while your son is under investigation for fraud involving forged medical credentials. Nolan's eyes snapped toward him. Who the hell are you? My name is Marcus Hale. Nolan stared for a moment. The lawyer. Marcus smiled faintly. One of them. Nolan looked from him to me. Understanding moved slowly through his face, distorted by swelling, medication, and rage. You married a lawyer? I married a man who reads documents before signing them, I said. Richard flinched. Nolan caught it. Even half paralyzed, he was still good at smelling weakness. His gaze darted from Richard to Vivian, then back to me. What did you tell them? He demanded. The truth, I said. He gave a slurred laugh. Your version. No, the one with bank records. His right hand stopped moving. For the first time since waking up, Nolan looked afraid. It lasted less than a second before arrogance covered it. But I saw it. So did Marcus. Vivian looked between us. Nolan, honey, they are saying terrible things. They are confused. They think your company... My company is fine, Nolan snapped. Richard's jaw tightened. Federal agents are here. Nolan's face changed again. There it was. The subpoena, the panic, the collapse. His body remembered before his pride could edit the story. Where are they? He asked. Outside, Marcus said, waiting until your medical condition allows formal procedures. Nolan swallowed. His mouth pulled unevenly. I want my attorney. You should have one, Marcus said. I want my phone. No, I said. His gaze whipped back to me. You do not get to decide that. In this ICU, with your current condition, I do. You are agitated, medically unstable, and trying to interfere with treatment. Your phone is not my priority. I will sue you. You can try. Richard stepped toward me. Enough. He is confused from surgery. I turned on him. No, he is exposed. Nolan sneered. Always wanted to say that, didn't you? Yes, I said. That honesty surprised him. I stepped closer to the bed, close enough that he could see my face clearly. Yes, Nolan, I have wanted to tell the truth for years. I wanted to tell them you stole $75,000 from my education fund. I wanted to tell them you bought that red Porsche with money grandfather left for my medical training. I wanted to tell them you forged a letter from my school because you knew I was going to expose you. I wanted to tell them you deleted the email that would have proved I was still enrolled. I wanted to tell them you stood on the staircase and watched Dad throw my clothes into a blizzard. Vivian covered her mouth. Richard stared at Nolan. I did not stop. I wanted to tell them that I worked overnight diner shifts, cleaned labs, tutored students, slept in libraries, and wore donated coats. Because you took what was meant to help me survive. I wanted to tell them I begged them to call the school, and they refused because believing you was easier than loving me. Nolan's face tightened. You are insane. No, I said. I am done. Richard's voice came out rough. Nolan. Nolan did not look at him. Nolan, Richard repeated. Tell me she is lying. There it was. Not an apology. Not horror at what had been done to me. A request for rescue. My father still wanted Nolan to hand him a version of the world where Richard Pierce had not been a fool. Nolan breathed hard through his nose. The monitor beeped faster. She was going to waste it, he muttered. The room froze. Vivian whispered. What? Nolan's eyes flicked toward her, irritated, as if she had interrupted a meeting. The money. She was going to waste it. My mother stepped back from the bed. Richard's face went gray. I felt no triumph, only a clean, terrible stillness. Nolan kept going because men like him do not know when silence is mercy. It was family money, he said. Grandfather was sentimental. She had no idea what to do with opportunity. She was going to bury herself in loans and books and come out thinking she was better than everyone. I stared at him. He smiled crookedly. I needed it more. Vivian shook her head slowly. Nolan, stop. But he was angry now, and anger always made him careless. She was going to ruin everything, he said. She was going to tell Dad and make a scene. I had to get her out before she turned everyone against me. Richard gripped the end of the bed. You forged the letter, he said. Nolan rolled his eyes. It was not hard. Vivian made a broken sound. Don't act shocked, Nolan snapped. You wanted to believe it. Both of you did. She was always miserable, always judging, always acting like being tired made her holy. His words should have hurt. Maybe once they would have. But all I could think was that the truth had finally entered the room, and it sounded exactly as ugly as I remembered. I looked at my parents. You did not lose a daughter 4 years ago. You threw one away. Vivian was crying for real now. Not pretty tears, not controlled tears. Her face had crumpled in a way I had never seen. But even then, I could not tell whether she was crying for me, for herself, or for the version of Nolan that had just died in front of her. Richard sat down slowly in the chair beside the bed. For once, he had nothing to say. Nolan looked disgusted by all of us. Oh, please, spare me the family therapy. I am the only reason this family had money coming in. Marcus's eyebrow lifted slightly. Had. Nolan's gaze snapped to him. Marcus said nothing else. He did not need to. Nolan understood enough to panic. What did they freeze? He demanded. Richard looked up. Nolan. What did they freeze? Nolan repeated louder. Vivian wiped her cheeks. Your father's accounts, some company accounts. They said, idiots, Nolan hissed. The word struck them both. Not enemies, not investigators, not bad luck. Idiots. That was what their golden son called them when the illusion slipped. I told you not to sign anything without me present, Nolan said to Richard. Richard stared at him. You told me it was a tax document. It was, in effect. Marcus gave a small laugh. Nolan glared at him. You think this is over? I think it is documented, Marcus said. Nolan's breathing grew harsher. His blood pressure climbed higher on the monitor. I nodded to Dr. Patel. Prepare labetalol. Nolan heard me. Do not drug me. Then stop trying to stroke again. He ignored that and looked at Vivian. Give me your phone. No, I said immediately. Vivian hesitated. Nolan's voice sharpened. Mom, phone, now. That tone did something astonishing. My mother moved automatically, reaching into her purse with shaking hands. Even after hearing him admit he had stolen from me, forged evidence, and destroyed our family, she still obeyed when he commanded. That was how deep the worship went. I could have stopped it. I should have stopped it medically. But Marcus touched my arm lightly, not to restrain me, just enough to tell me he saw something I had not. Let him, he said quietly. I looked at him. Marcus's eyes stayed on Nolan. This may be useful. Vivian handed Nolan the phone. With his right hand trembling, Nolan tried to unlock it. His thumb slipped twice. His speech worsened as he cursed under his breath. Finally, Vivian unlocked it for him and held it where he could see me. What are you doing? Richard asked. Nolan did not answer. He opened a browser, typed slowly, badly. His left side remained motionless, and frustration made his face twitch. He demanded a password manager. Vivian helped, crying silently while obeying him like a servant. Then I saw the login screen. Marcus saw it too. Nolan, Marcus said, I would strongly advise against accessing undisclosed financial accounts in front of witnesses. Nolan smiled. Even with a drooping face, even with his body half broken, he found a way to look smug. You have no idea what I have, he said. You think I kept everything where amateurs could freeze it? Richard leaned forward. Hope returned to his face so quickly it was almost nauseating. Vivian whispered. Nolan? Nolan's eyes glittered. Cayman structure, 4 layers, private wallet bridge, 14 million. They will never find all of it. The room went colder. Marcus's face remained calm, but I knew him well enough to see the interest sharpen behind his eyes. Richard breathed out. 14 million? Vivian pressed a hand to her chest. Oh, thank God. I stared at them. They had just heard their son confess to hidden offshore assets in the middle of a federal fraud investigation, and relief was the first thing they felt. Not shame, not horror, relief. Because money had always been their real religion. Nolan looked at me like he had won. See? You saved my life just in time to watch me walk away. Your left leg cannot move, I said. Let's manage expectations. His smile faltered. Vivian held the phone closer as the account page loaded. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The progress circle spun. Nolan's breathing was loud in the room. Richard stood. Vivian trembled. Marcus watched the screen without blinking. Marisol had moved closer to the door, ready to call security or another nurse if this turned into a medical event. Then the page opened. Nolan's smirk disappeared. Vivian frowned. What does that mean? Richard stepped closer. Refresh it. Nolan said nothing. The balance read 0, not pending, not restricted, 0. His right hand began to shake. No, he whispered. Marcus moved with relaxed precision, taking the phone from Vivian before Nolan could throw it. He looked at the screen, then at Nolan. Offshore does not mean invisible, Marcus said. It just means harder to explain to a judge. Nolan's face turned a dangerous shade of red. No, he said again, louder. No, No, no. The monitor shrieked. His blood pressure spiked. His right hand slammed against the restraint. His left side did not move, and that seemed to enrage him more than the money. He tried to lift himself from the bed, but his body betrayed him. The right half strained. The left half lay heavy and silent. "Nolan, stop," I said. He stared at me with pure hatred. "You did this!" "The federal government seized assets connected to fraud," Marcus said. "Try to keep up." Nolan's breathing became ragged. Dr. Patel moved in with medication. The nurse tightened her hold. Vivian backed away, sobbing. Richard looked as if someone had taken a hammer to the foundation of his skull. Their son had lost his company, his money, his body. And still, he was searching for someone else to blame. I gave the order for blood pressure control. This time, Nolan did not have enough strength to fight everyone. The medication entered his line. Slowly, the monitor began to settle. His eyes stayed open, fixed on me. "You ruined me," he whispered. "No," I said. "I saved your life. You ruined everything else." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vivian turned toward me with a look I knew too well. Not hatred, exactly. Need. The kind that crawled toward you and called itself love. "Elena," she said, voice shaking. "The house." I closed my eyes for half a second. Of course. Nolan had admitted the theft. The offshore money was gone. The accounts were frozen. The company was collapsing. My brother lay under guard in an ICU bed after accusing me of malpractice and confessing to hidden assets. But my parents still had one thing left to demand from me: the Highland Park estate, the house with the staircase, the foyer, the glass, the driveway, the snow. Vivian stepped closer, tears running down her face. "Elena," she whispered, as if she had finally remembered I was her daughter, only because she needed something. "You have to help us save the house." And just like that, I understood the next war had begun. There are sentences that sound small until you understand what they are really asking. "Elena, you have to help us save the house." My mother said it in the ICU corridor with mascara under her eyes, pearls still shining at her throat, and my brother sedated behind glass after confessing to theft, forgery, fraud, and hidden offshore money. My father stood beside her in stunned silence, one hand pressed against the wall like the hospital itself had tilted under him. For a second, I did not answer, because I knew that house. I knew the foyer where Richard had held Nolan's forged letter like a verdict. I knew the staircase where Nolan had watched me beg. I knew the front door my father opened before throwing my clothes into the snow. I knew the window where my mother stood and watched me drag trash bags down the driveway. That house was not just property. It was the place where they decided I was disposable. And now they wanted me to save it. Richard recovered first, because men like him do not stay shocked for long. They reach for control the way drowning people reach for air. "We do not know the full situation yet," he said. "There may be misunderstandings in the loan documents." Marcus looked at him. "There are not." Richard ignored him. "The estate has been in our family for years." "No," I said. "It has been in your name for years." His face tightened. "This is not the time for technicalities." That is what people say when technicalities become consequences. Vivian gave a soft sob. "Please, Elena, not now. Nolan is in that bed. Your father's accounts are frozen. We cannot lose the house, too." I looked through the ICU glass. Nolan lay still now, one side of his face slack, his right hand resting uselessly over the blanket. Machines breathed rhythm into the room. He looked almost innocent when sedated. but I knew what he had been awake. I knew what he had admitted. Marcus opened his folder again. The Highland Park estate was used as collateral on a private loan connected to Neurovanta's operating capital. The loan is in default. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings before tonight. Richard's voice cracked with rage. That is impossible. It is recorded. I never agreed to that. Marcus looked at him. You signed. Richard's eyes went hard. Nolan misled me. Yes, Marcus said. He did. I watched that sentence land. Not cruelly, simply. Nolan had misled him. But Richard had allowed it because the lie came wrapped in the son he worshipped. You had an accountant, Marcus continued. Walter Grayson. He raised concerns about irregular liens and unexplained transfers 8 months ago. Vivian looked at Richard. Walter. Richard said nothing. Marcus turned a page. You fired him 11 days later. Richard's jaw flexed. He was overstepping. He was warning you. He was questioning my son. And that, Marcus said, was apparently unforgivable. The corridor went quiet except for distant monitors and soft footsteps from nurses moving between rooms. Vivian's breathing changed first. It became shallow, quick. Her hand rose to her chest, fingers curling against the pearls at her throat. Vivian, Richard said. She shook her head. No. Her knees buckled. Marcel, who had stayed nearby in case Nolan's condition changed, moved faster than anyone else. She caught my mother by the elbow before she hit the floor and guided her into a chair against the wall. Ma'am, breathe with me, Marisol said. Slow breaths. Vivian clutched at her coat. The house, the club, the board, everyone will know. Not, where will we live? Not, what did we do to our daughter? Not, how could Nolan betray us? Everyone will know. That was my mother's real terror. Not poverty. Exposure. Her makeup ran in thin, dark lines. Her polished face broke apart under fluorescent lights. For 1 second, I saw something beneath the performance. A frightened woman who had built her entire life out of other people's approval and was watching it collapse in public. And to my shame, some small part of me still felt pity. That is the part nobody warns you about when you escape people who hurt you. You can know exactly what they are. You can remember every wound. You can build a life without them. And still, when they cry, some child inside you reaches for a towel, a glass of water, a way to make them stop hurting. For 1 second, I saw my mother crying and the little girl inside me still wanted to fix it. Then Vivian looked up at me and said, You have money now. The pity died quietly. She grabbed my hand with cold fingers. Elena, listen to me. You are a surgeon. Marcus is an attorney. You have resources. You can speak to the bank. You can stop this. Richard stepped closer, voice regaining strength now that there was someone to pressure. We are not asking you to give anything away. It could be structured as a family loan. I looked at him. A family loan. Yes. Low interest, I assume. His silence answered. Vivian wiped her cheeks. You could sell something. Hospital shares, investments, whatever you have. Marcus must have access to funds. We just need time. Marcus's expression became very still. I knew that look. It meant he was letting me decide how much of the room to burn down. Richard continued. You owe us some consideration. I stared at him. For what? For raising you. The words were so absurd that for a second I thought I had misheard. He kept going. You lived under our roof. You had opportunities because of our name. Whatever happened later, you cannot pretend you came from nothing. I did not come from nothing, I said. I came from damage. Vivian flinched. That is cruel. No, cruel was leaving me outside without a coat. Richard's face darkened. We thought you had disgraced this family. You did not think. You chose. Vivian's voice trembled. We made mistakes. Is that what you need to hear? Fine. Mistakes were made. But this is still family. There it was again. Family. The word they had used like a locked door when I needed safety, and like an open wallet when they needed rescue. I pulled my hand free. Vivian's face changed, panic sharpening into manipulation. If you ever wanted to prove you were not selfish, this is your chance. That sentence did something beautiful inside me. It closed the last door. Not violently, not dramatically, just with a quiet click. Because I finally understood. My mother was not sorry. She was negotiating. She was still using love as a leash, still offering approval as something I could earn if I paid enough, forgave enough, bled enough. I looked at her and said, You are not asking for forgiveness. You are asking for financing. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I turned to my father. I will not sell anything. I will not use my husband's money. I will not pay the default. I will not negotiate with the bank on your behalf. I will not rescue Nolan from consequences. And I will not buy back love from people who never gave it freely. Richard's eyes narrowed. So, you are going to let your mother become homeless? No, I said. Nolan did that. You helped him. I am refusing to become the ex's strategy. Vivian began crying harder. How can you stand there and say that? Because family is a word you only use when you need someone else to pay your bill. Richard took one step toward me. Do not forget who you are speaking to. For years, that sentence had worked. That night, it died in the air. I know exactly who I'm speaking to, I said. A man who threw his daughter into a snowstorm because a forged letter was easier to believe than her voice. A woman who watched from behind glass. Parents who spent 4 years calling me a failure until my skill became useful. You do not get to call that love because the mortgage is due. Marisol looked down. Marcus watched me with quiet pride. Richard looked as if he wanted to shout, but there were too many witnesses and not enough power left in his voice. So he did what men like Richard do when they cannot win morally. He reached for lawyers. This conversation is over, Bassa, he said. I agree. No, he said. I mean, I am done allowing you and your husband to intimidate this family. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Interesting description. Richard pulled out his phone. His hand shook, but his voice sharpened as he paced toward the window. Preston, Richard Pierce, I need you at Northwestern Memorial immediately. Medical malpractice, possible intentional injury. Yes, my son. Yes, Elena. She operated on him. There may also be coercion involving property assets. Vivian looked up, a desperate glow returning to her eyes. I almost admired the speed. They had gone from begging me to save the house to accusing me of malpractice in under 3 minutes. Marcus leaned closer to me. Preston Vale? You know him? Unfortunately, that was not reassuring. Preston Vale arrived 40 minutes later with the energy of a man who had smelled blood and mistaken it for opportunity. He was broad, loud, over-perfumed, and dressed in a suit that looked expensive from far away but desperate up close. He entered the ICU waiting area already talking. Where's my client? Richard stood. Preston. Vale shook his hand hard, then turned to Vivian with theatrical sympathy. Mrs. Pierce, I am so sorry. No parent should endure this. Vivian nodded, crying again. because she had found a new audience. Vale's eyes landed on me. He smiled like a camera was watching. "Dr. Pierce?" I said nothing. His gaze moved to Marcus. The smile weakened for half a second. "Hail," he said. "Vale." The temperature in the room changed. Preston recovered quickly. "I understand there are serious questions regarding surgical conduct, conflict of interest, failure to transfer care, and possible intentional harm resulting in paralysis." I looked at Richard. He did not look away. Marcus answered before I could. "You understand that based on what?" "My client's statements." "You have reviewed the chart?" "I was just retained." "The imaging?" "I will request." "The surgical notes?" "In due course." "The operative witnesses?" Vale's jaw tightened. "I do not need a lecture on procedure." Marcus smiled faintly. "That is unfortunate. Procedure may come up." Preston turned to me, trying to reclaim control. "Dr. Pierce, given the personal history involved, any reasonable institution would question whether you should have performed this operation." I finally spoke. "He was herniating." Vale blinked. "Excuse me?" "He had a ruptured aneurysm, active hemorrhage, increasing intracranial pressure, declining neurological function, and minutes before irreversible injury. I was the qualified neurovascular surgeon present. Transfer would likely have killed him." Preston waved a hand. "That is your version." "No," Marisol said from behind him. Everyone turned. She stood with a clipboard against her chest, expression calm and deadly. "That is what happened." Vale's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Charge nurse. Present from arrival to OR transfer." Marcus added, "Along with multiple physicians, nurses, anesthesia staff, respiratory therapy, emergency records, time-stamped imaging, medication logs, and continuous monitoring data." Vale's confidence thinned. Richard snapped, "She had motive." Marcus looked at him. "To save him? To hurt him?" "She clipped the aneurysm successfully. He is paralyzed. The paralysis is documented as stroke-related injury from the hemorrhage prior to surgical intervention." Vale lifted his chin. "That will be determined by experts. Experts who will read the chart you have not reviewed." Vivian clutched her tissue. "She admitted she hated him." "I admitted nothing of the sort," I said. "And there are witnesses." Richard said, "She was angry." I was focused. "You refused to help us financially." I almost laughed. "That is not malpractice." Preston's eyes flicked toward Marcus, and I could see him recalculating. He had expected a frightened doctor, grieving parents, a wealthy family, and a hospital eager to settle quietly. Instead, he had walked into federal agents, a fraud attorney who knew his name, medical witnesses, and a patient whose own accusations were tangled with a securities investigation. Still, men like Preston Vale do not retreat without testing the floor. "My clients are prepared to pursue aggressive action," he said, "unless the hospital and Dr. Pierce agree to immediate resolution." Marcus asked, "Define resolution." $3 million placed into escrow pending full settlement discussion, cancellation of all hospital charges related to Mr. Pierce's care, written acknowledgement of potential negligence, and an agreement that Dr. Pierce will not participate in any further financial action against the Pierce family estate. I stared at him. There it was. Not just malpractice. The house. Marcus was silent for a moment, and because I knew him, I understood that silence was not hesitation. It was restraint. Then he said, "No." Preston frowned. "No? No." Richard exploded. "You do not get to decide that." Marcus turned to him. "Actually, I get to answer an extortionate demand made in my presence. based on false medical claims by a lawyer who has not reviewed a single record and appears to be connecting settlement to unrelated property proceedings. Vale's face flushed. Careful. I am. The softness left Marcus's voice. Your claim is frivolous on its face. Your witnesses are financially motivated. Your patient is under federal investigation, medically unstable, and already made statements in front of staff that connect hidden assets to fraud. Any settlement funds connected to Nolan Pierce may be subject to seizure or scrutiny. Any attempt to use a malpractice threat to interfere with lawful debt enforcement may create additional exposure. Preston's mouth tightened. You are threatening me. No, Marcus said. I am describing the room you walked into before checking where the exits were. Marsal pressed her lips together, almost smiling. Marcus opened his folder and removed another page. Also, while we are discussing professional standards, would you like to address your own? Preston went very still. Richard looked confused. What is that? Marcus did not look at him. Public disciplinary record, prior sanctions for misleading settlement communications, temporary license suspension, pending ethics inquiry involving client fund management, 2 judicial reprimands for filing claims without adequate factual basis. Preston's face changed from red to pale. Vivian whispered, Preston. Vale turned on Richard. You did not tell me federal agents were involved. Richard stiffened. That is irrelevant. You did not tell me your son was under investigation for securities fraud. He is a victim. You did not tell me there were medical witnesses contradicting your accusation. Richard's voice sharpened. I told you what mattered. No, Preston said. You told me what you wanted to be true. For the first time all night, I liked him a little. Not enough to respect him, but enough to enjoy the symmetry. Preston straightened his jacket and took a step back. I am not representing you in this matter. Richard stared. You cannot withdraw. I can decline representation I have not formally accepted after being materially misled. Vivian rose. But you said... I said I would assess the claim. I have assessed it. Marcus said, efficiently. Preston glared at him, but there was no force behind it. Then he turned to Richard. Do not contact me again regarding this matter. He left faster than he had arrived. The silence after he disappeared felt enormous. Nolan was still sedated behind glass. Federal agents remained down the hall. Richard's card was useless. Vivian's social world was crumbling. The malpractice threat had collapsed. The hospital bill remained. The company was under investigation. The accounts were frozen. The house was in default. For the first time in my life, my family was out of weapons. No money, no reputation, no golden son, no lawyer willing to bark for them, only truth. And they had no idea how to survive in a room with it. Vivian sank back into the chair. Her voice was small now. Elena, please. I looked at her. There it was again. The plea. The old hook searching for soft tissue. But it did not find any. Richard stood rigid, breathing hard through his nose. You will regret this. No, I said. I have spent 4 years regretting that I ever thought your love was something I could earn. He flinched, but not enough. Marcus placed a hand lightly at my back, not pushing, just there. I could have walked away then. Maybe a kinder woman would have. Maybe a crueler woman would have stayed to watch them beg. I was neither. I was tired. I was clear. And I had one more truth to deliver. You should know something, I said. Richard's eyes narrowed. What now? The bank is not foreclosing in the morning. Vivian's head lifted. Hope returned so quickly it almost made me sick. What? She whispered. Richard stared at me, suspicion fighting relief. What did you do? Vivian stood, wiping her face with shaking hands. You paid it. Elena, thank God. I knew you would not let us lose everything. I knew beneath all this anger, you still— No, I said. The word cut through her fantasy. I did not pay off your debt. Richard's expression hardened. Then what does that mean? I looked at the two people who had left me outside in the snow and asked me to save the roof over the memory. It means the bank is not taking the house tomorrow, I said. Vivian reached for Richard's arm. I held her eyes, because I already did. For 1 second, nobody moved. My words seemed to hang in the ICU corridor, too clean and sharp for my parents to understand. Because I already did. Vivian stared at me first. Her tears paused on her cheeks. Richard's face did not change immediately. He looked like a man hearing a language he recognized but refusing the meaning. Then Nolan's muffled monitor beeped from behind the glass, and the world started moving again. What did you say? Richard asked. I looked at him. The bank is not foreclosing tomorrow because the bank no longer owns the debt. Vivian's fingers tightened around his sleeve. Elena paid it, she whispered, as if saying it confidently enough could make it true. She must have paid it. Richard, she paid it. Richard's eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing hope. Did you? No. Vivian's voice shook. Then what does that mean? Marcus stepped slightly beside me, not in front of me. He had the documents ready, but he let me speak first. That mattered. He had helped build the structure, but the decision had been mine. It means the bank sold the distressed debt, I said. A private acquisition firm purchased it. Richard went still. I continued. That firm is controlled by an LLC I own. Vivian blinked. No. Yes. No, you cannot just buy someone's home. I did not buy your home from you, I said. I bought the debt attached to it after default. Then I enforced the terms your son created and your husband signed. Richard's face turned dark. This is illegal. Marcus opened his folder. It is not. Richard snapped. I was not speaking to you. I know, Marcus said calmly. That is why you are wrong. The old Richard would have erupted. The old Richard would have made the room smaller with his voice. But this was not his foyer. These were not his employees. These people did not depend on his money, and his money was no longer answering when called. Marcus placed a packet on the table near the waiting area chairs. Distressed debt purchase. Assignment of note. Default notice. Recorded transfer. Court-approved enforcement timeline. County stamp is on page 6. Richard picked up the documents with hands that shook despite his effort to hide it. Vivian stood beside him, reading without understanding, her lips moving silently. No, she said again. No, this is our house. It was, I said. Her head lifted. You paid the bank? I purchased the right to enforce the debt. That is the same thing. No, paying it would have saved you. Buying it gave me the legal right to remove you. The cruelty of that sentence should have thrilled me. It did not. What I felt was colder, cleaner, like setting down something heavy after carrying it for miles. Richard flipped through the pages faster now. You planned this? Yes. How long? Long enough. Vivian stepped toward me. You sat here and watched me beg. I watched you bargain, I said. There is a difference. Her face crumpled. Elena, please. Whatever happened between us? Whatever happened? I repeated. My voice did not rise, but she stopped anyway. You left me outside in a snowstorm, Vivian. You watched me drag trash bags down a frozen driveway because Nolan forged a letter and you preferred his lie. Do not reduce that to whatever happened because now the house is attached to it. Richard threw the papers onto the table. You vindictive little... Marcus's voice cut in. Finish that sentence carefully. Richard glared at him. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because my father still had not learned the shape of the room. He thought authority was volume. Marcus knew authority was preparation. Vivian turned to him desperately. Richard, do something. He grabbed the packet again, scanning for a weakness, a mistake, a line he could attack. I knew that look. I had seen it when he read contracts at the dining room table. The problem was, this time the papers had not been prepared by someone afraid of him. They had been prepared by Marcus and approved by people Richard could not intimidate. From inside Nolan's room came a rough voice. What is happening? The sedative had not fully put him under, or maybe rage had dragged him halfway back to the surface. Vivian rushed to the glass. Nolan, don't move. He turned his head slightly. His eyes were heavy but sharp enough to hate. What did she do? No one answered. So I stepped to the doorway. I bought the debt on the estate, I said. The house is mine now. For a moment, Nolan looked confused. Then he began to laugh. It was an ugly sound, slurred and broken by weakness. No, you didn't. Marcus picked up a copy of the deed transfer documents and handed them to Vivian. Read the highlighted section. She looked down, shaking her head. Read it aloud, I said. She refused. So Marcus gave the page to Richard. Richard stared at the highlighted line. His throat moved. Nolan snapped. Read it. That was the only voice Richard still obeyed. His face gray, my father read. The secured party, through lawful assignment and enforcement of default provisions, transfers possessory and ownership interest in the collateral property located at... He stopped. Continue, I said. His eyes lifted to mine. For the first time in my life, I saw something like fear in them. Continue, I repeated. He looked back down. The Highland Park Estate, he said quietly, to Pierce Hale Holdings, LLC. Vivian made a sound like air leaving a punctured lung. Nolan stared at me. Pierce Hale, my name and my husband's name, not Richard's, not Nolan's, mine. I walked closer to the glass, not because I wanted Nolan to hear me, because I wanted all of them to. I own the foyer where you called me a failure, I said to Richard. I own the staircase where Nolan smiled. I own the dining room where Vivian turned every meal into a trial. I own the front door you opened before throwing my clothes into the snow. My mother covered her mouth. I looked at her last. And I own the driveway you left me on. No one spoke, not even Nolan. For years, I had imagined shouting those words. In my imagination, they were fire. In reality, they came out almost gently. Maybe because the victory was not in hurting them. The victory was in finally putting a boundary around a place that had once swallowed me whole. Richard recovered enough to reach for anger. You think this makes you powerful? No, I said. It makes me finished. Vivian shook her head. Where are we supposed to go? I am not responsible for that. I am your mother. You remembered that late. She flinched. Marcus handed Richard another notice. You have 24 hours to remove personal belongings not tied to disputed or fraudulent assets. Items listed in federal seizure or investor recovery proceedings will be inventoried. If you refuse to vacate, sheriff's enforcement will proceed. Richard stared at the paper. 24 hours? Yes. My wife cannot pack an estate in 24 hours. You should focus on personal necessities, Marcus said. Clothing, medication, identification, legal documents not subject to hold. Vivian's mouth trembled. My furniture, my art. Many items are being reviewed for source of funds issues, Marcus said. She looked horrified. You are taking everything. No, I said. Consequences are... That made her snap. The softness disappeared from her face, and the woman behind the performance came out raw. You are cruel, she hissed. You are evil. I don't know what he did to you, but Marcus poisoned you against your own blood. I looked at my husband, then back at my mother. No one poisoned me, Vivian. You raised me in poison. I just stopped drinking it. Her hand flew toward her chest again, but this time I did not move to help. From the bed, Nolan's voice rose. You think you won? The monitor began to pick up speed. I turned toward him. Do not start. He strained against the restraint with his right hand. You stole my house. You used it as collateral. It was mine. It was never yours. It was going to be. There is your whole life in one sentence. His face twisted. I will kill you. The room went silent. Then everything moved quickly. Marisol stepped to the doorway. Dr. Patel called for medication. Security straightened. Marcus moved closer to me, though I did not step back. Nolan kept going, spitting through slurred speech. I will burn it down before I let you have it. You hear me? I will burn that place to the ground. His blood pressure climbed dangerously. The monitor shrieked. His right side fought the restraint while his left side lay motionless. And that betrayal of his own body seemed to drive him further into rage. Nolan, I said, my voice becoming purely medical. You are endangering yourself. You did this, he shouted. You did all of this. No, I saved your life. Then you should have let me die. For a second, the room stilled around that sentence. Vivian sobbed. Richard looked away. I felt nothing move inside me. Maybe that was the final proof. I turned to Dr. Patel. Administer sedation. Continue blood pressure control. Page Dr. Simmons from Neurocritical Care. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing as attending surgeon due to direct threats and conflict concerns. Document the threat to burn the property and kill me. Nolan's eyes widened. You can't walk away. I already saved your life, I said. I am not required to stand here while you try to make me responsible for destroying it. The medication entered his IV. His rage fought it for a moment, then lost. His eyelids grew heavy. His mouth kept moving after the words stopped making sense. Vivian cried over him as if sedation were another cruelty I had invented. I walked out. Marcus followed me down the corridor. Neither of us spoke until we reached the elevator. My reflection stared back from the metal doors. Surgical cap gone, hair loose at the edges, face pale, eyes steady. I looked exhausted. I also looked free in a way I did not yet understand. The doors opened. We stepped inside. Before they closed, Richard's voice called out from the corridor. Elena! I should have ignored him. I did not. The elevator doors started to close, but Richard shoved a hand between them and forced them open. His face was flushed, his tie loosened, his dignity shredded but not gone. Men like Richard could lose everything and still treat humiliation like an insult other people owed them for. Parking garage, he said. Now. Marcus glanced at me. I nodded once. We rode down in silence, Richard standing on the other side of the elevator like a storm that had run out of rain but not thunder. The parking garage smelled like concrete, oil, and cold air. Fluorescent lights buzzed above us. It was not snowing inside, but my body remembered another driveway anyway. Richard turned on me before we reached our car. You think paperwork protects you? He said. You think because you have a lawyer husband and a hospital title, you can destroy this family without consequence? I did not destroy this family. You stole my home. Nolan leveraged it. You signed. I enforced. You waited, he snapped. You waited until we were vulnerable. I looked at him. You mean the way you waited until I was alone in your foyer before throwing me out? His mouth tightened. I will go to the media, he said. I will tell them everything. Daughter surgeon paralyzes brother, steals family estate while he is in ICU. They will love it. Marcus opened his briefcase. Richard faltered. Marcus removed a letter and held it out. Cease and desist. Notice of intent to sue for defamation, tortious interference, and malicious falsehood if you publish or cause to be published knowingly false statements regarding Dr. Pierce's medical conduct or lawful acquisition proceedings. Richard stared at the envelope. Marcus added, there is also a prepared press packet with the verified medical timeline, operative records summary, witness list, deed transfer records, fraud investigation references, and documented threats made by Nolan in the ICU. We would prefer privacy, but if you insist on making this public, we are prepared to make it accurate. Richard's hand shook as he took the letter. Marcus stepped closer, his voice calm. You can speak, Richard. You cannot lie. For once, my father had no immediate weapon. His eyes moved to me. You hate us that much? I thought about it. The answer mattered. No, I said. I do not hate you enough to keep carrying you. That seemed to confuse him more than hatred would have. Marcus's phone rang. He checked the screen, answered, listened for a few seconds, then said, Understood. Send confirmation. He ended the call. I already knew. Nolan? I asked. Marcus nodded. Federal custody at the hospital. Medical hold remains, but agents have initiated formal custody procedures. Richard looked like someone had hit him. I walked toward our car. This time, I did not turn back because guilt tugged at me. I turned back because I wanted to see him clearly one last time. 24 hours, I said. Take what is yours. Leave what never was. Then I got into the car with my husband. As Marcus drove out of the garage, I expected the old guilt to rise. The familiar nausea. The child inside me asking whether I had gone too far. Whether maybe, if I softened now, they might finally love me correctly. But the guilt did not come. Outside the hospital, Chicago lights blurred against the windshield. The city kept moving. Somewhere above us, Nolan was alive, angry, and under guard. Somewhere north of us, the Highland Park estate sat behind iron gates, no longer waiting for them. For the first time since the night they left me in the snow, I felt no need to be chosen by people who had already shown me what their choosing was worth. 1 month later, the Pierce family name no longer opened doors. It still appeared in old charity programs, engraved donor plaques, and photographs from galas where my mother stood beneath chandeliers pretending kindness was something she practiced instead of performed. It still existed in business archives, country club newsletters, and society pages that had once treated my parents like permanent fixtures in a world built for people who never expected gravity to apply to them. But names are only powerful when people agree to keep pretending. And after Nolan's arrest became public, people stopped pretending. The Highland Park estate was no longer theirs. The gates that had once made the property feel untouchable now kept strangers from entering while legal teams inventoried what remained. Federal recovery specialists tagged artwork, traced purchases, reviewed furniture invoices, and separated personal belongings from assets tied to fraudulent money. The marble foyer where my father had called me a failure echoed with footsteps from people carrying clipboards. The staircase where Nolan had smiled while I begged was measured, photographed, and documented like evidence. Richard and Vivian were given 24 hours to take essentials. They took clothes, medication, documents, a few boxes of photographs, and whatever pride could fit in a rented SUV. Everything else stayed behind. Their country club membership was revoked quietly. That was how places like that handled scandal. No dramatic expulsion, no public vote, just an email written in polished language about membership review, reputational concerns, and indefinite suspension of privileges. Vivian's charity board removed her just as gently. They thanked her for years of service, praised her commitment, and replaced her name on the gala committee before the week ended. People like my parents feared cruelty from enemies. They were not prepared for politeness from friends. Their old circle did not attack them. That would have required courage. Instead, they stopped returning calls. Lunch invitations vanished. Former business partners became unavailable. Women who had kissed Vivian's cheek at fundraisers now crossed stores pretending to read labels on imported olive oil. Men who once laughed too loudly at Richard's jokes began answering his messages with short phrases like, "Terrible timing," or "Let's connect once things settle." Things did not settle. They fell. My parents moved into a small, subsidized apartment on the edge of the city. Arranged through a legal aid referral, they hated accepting but could not afford to refuse. I learned that from Marcus, not because I asked him to monitor them, but because their names appeared in filings related to creditor disputes and asset freezes. He told me only what I needed to know. The building had peeling linoleum in the hallways, thin walls, and a radiator that clanged through the night. Their apartment had one bedroom, a second-hand sofa, a narrow kitchen with aging cabinets, and a living room window facing a brick wall. From heated marble floors to stained tile, from private chefs to generic groceries, from a gated estate to a buzzer that barely worked. I wish I could say I felt nothing when I pictured it. That would be a lie. I did not feel guilty. Not anymore. But grief is strange. It can rise for things you never actually had. I grieved the parents they should have been. I grieved the home that should have protected me. I grieved the version of my mother who might have wrapped a coat around my shoulders instead of watching through glass. But I did not rescue them. That was the difference between grief and surrender. The first public crack in Vivian's new life happened at a discount grocery store 3 weeks after the move. I did not witness it myself. I heard about it from Marcus because one of the attorneys involved in the creditor case had seen the aftermath mentioned in a social post before it disappeared. Vivian went shopping in an old beige coat and sunglasses too large for her face. She chose a store far from the neighborhoods where anyone from her former life